Well, I have to admit that while I do appreciate running and like the feel of it, just as exercise and just physically how it makes me feel, I do have to say that the marathon is one of those events that I have absolutely no desire at all ever to compete in. And every time I meet someone who has run in a marathon or who is a marathoner, I think my head just starts shaking involuntarily. Both impressed by the discipline, the endurance that they have, whatever took them to get there, but then also thinking of my failure of imagination for what it would take me to get there, for what it would take me to complete that. And the thing about marathoning is you don't have to look too far into the world of marathons before you find stories of cheaters. And the most brazen examples, I think, are people who, runners who leave the course to catch like a bus or a taxi or a subway, or maybe even jump on a bike that they had stashed at some part of the race, ride it for a while, and then catch up to another part of the route a little bit further on. All these are actual examples. But the most common is almost always a shortcut. Either jumping a barrier or, in one famous example, runners cutting through a large median of a long in and out, right, or an out and back, cut through the median where it doubles back and hope to shave off a few miles of the race. Now, those who are accused of cheating often deny it. But when presented with evidence of cheating, usually it's the split times that just don't add up, just don't make sense. Their reasons vary. Some of them say, it was kind of my anxiety or need for validation that they just cave into. And some of them even blame the culture of competition. Or sometimes also a deep sense of shame at realizing they can't complete what they've set out to do. So they see cheating as a shortcut, right? A shortcut to recognition, a shortcut to that sense of accomplishment or to feeling good about themselves. And now not all shortcuts are cheating, but all cheating is in some ways a shortcut, right? Now for the most part, there's usually nothing wrong with shortcuts. We do them in our lives, right? They save time, they save energy, they cut past the waiting and the work. But the key difference between cheating and a shortcut is usually, with a shortcut, there's very little expectation or very little stakes. The stakes are really low, right? Some examples of shortcuts here. We often use them in menial tasks, right? There's no competition there. I'm not going to sit down and crank out the numbers and do the math. I'm just going to get my calculator out sometimes, right? Or get that microwave oven, just pop something in the microwave. It's easy. Or sometimes, we just get the Cliff's Notes version of something, right? The shortcut's usually okay, but for an experience that would be richer otherwise, like, say, reading a novel, we sometimes miss out on that experience, right, of what that journey is like. So we just grab the Cliff Notes version, or in today's parlance, right, just find the TLDR version, right? Too long, didn't read. Just find something that's easy and quick. Or turn to ChatGPT or some AI program, right? It's natural to want a shortcut. That's fine. But when it comes to areas of life that require work, a shortcut can start feeling artificial. It starts intruding on our ideas of what is earned and what's deserved. We sometimes start looking for ways that we measure up, and so look for kind of that edge or that something a little extra. It doesn't stop us from wanting a shortcut. Today, two disciples, James and John, come to Jesus. Teacher, we want you to do for us whatever we ask of you. My first reaction, hopefully our first reaction, is, gosh, what entitlement, right? Who do you think you are? And it bothers the other disciples too. And maybe that's the thing that's a little surprising here too. Just a few verses later, it seems like they ask this right in front of everyone else. That's a pretty bold move, right? To ask for that exclusive preferential treatment in front of everyone. This story is found elsewhere in Matthew's gospel, except it's their mom who asks for them. It's not James and John. So that's kind of interesting there. But whatever the case, they approach Jesus in this situation like he's this genie in the lamp, right? Grant us to sit one at your right hand, one at your left hand in glory. And of course, Jesus' response right away, you do not know what you're asking. And this is an interesting moment here. This moment where they've made their request known. Jesus says, you don't know what you're asking. One would think that this moment could be an opportunity to step back and have a little self-examination, right? A time of reflection. Well, what am I seeking? Why do I want that, right? I think reflection is an overlooked part of our decision-making process. It's an opportunity not only for introspection, but to examine this culture of privilege and status that the disciples were surrounded by, and even critique its influence on their lives. Well, Jesus asks them, are you able? Are you able to drink the cup that I drink, or be baptized with the baptism that I'm baptized with? And then without missing a beat, right, they reply, yeah, we can do it. We're able. Now remember, they still don't know what it will take. Jesus has still said, you don't know what you're asking. They don't realize the shape of Christian glory here, and in some ways it's hard to blame them. They're fresh off Jesus' teaching that we heard last week when he tells the disciples, anyone who's left their family to follow me, they'll receive 100-fold in this age and in the age to come, right? 100-fold of what they've given up. So to sit by Jesus in glory is a reasonable ask in a system of patronage and status and empire, especially when the people like the disciples look around and see a system that's just stacked against them. They're not the ones who are already on top here. They're the ones who have to grind it out. Who doesn't want a favor? Who doesn't want a hand up? It's easy to be upset at James and John until I think about the times when I've had to ask for a favor, right? The times when I've been entitled, when I've used my privilege to try to get an edge, something a little extra. Maybe you've had that experience as well. But there's no shortcut here. And Jesus is not interested in just a redistribution or reorganization of power. He's not just accepting a system of status and reward as, well, that's just the way the world works. He's kind of jamming that stoppage, that stick in the spokes of injustice, as Bonhoeffer explains. And Jesus sides with the oppressed, the way of nonviolence, and he knows that justice is costly. And right before this, right before James and John are asking even their request, Jesus tells them that he'll be handed over. Right? Sorry. And they will condemn, this is him explaining himself to the disciples, what's going to happen to him. And they will condemn him to death, and they will hand him over to the Gentiles. They will mock him and spit on him and flog him and kill him, and after 3 days he will rise again. See, James and John go right to the rising again part of Jesus' instruction here, right? A shortcut past that suffering and dying. They miss that crucible of service for the sake of others. And the scripture also finds us in election season, doesn't it? As we approach just a couple weeks out now, the beginning of November, another election where we're surrounded by voices and campaigns making claims to power and what power should look like. And most of us, admittedly, aren't running for office, but there are other ways that we might be tempted by the power of and this world's shortcuts to glory. And here Jesus has a reminder for us, doesn't he? But it is not to be so among you. Whoever wishes to become great among you must be your servants. And Jesus here enters that, foot washing image that we have of him, that servant leadership. And Jesus goes on to tell James and John that the decision of who would be at his right and whose left side is not for him to decide, but it is for those whom it has been prepared. And of course, later on, we know that there are two who are on Jesus' side when he comes into glory, aren't there? And they're not the two who ask to be there. This message is not lost on James and John, nor is it lost on the rest of the disciples. They would go on to give their lives for this message. And we are here today because of God's work in their lives. And there's something humbling about that. And if God can transform their ambition, their hopes for glory, then there's hope for us too. Thanks be to God.